Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. With Phoebe's arrival, we have yet another featured 5-star resonator. And let's just say, she'll really brighten your day. Cause she's Spectro, and Spectro is very bright because it's anyway, you'll learn everything you need to know about everyone's favorite sun hat enthusiast in today's ultimate guide video. Phoebe is the first limited 5-star resonator to make use of the new damage over time mechanic introduced recently in Wuthering Waves, Frazzle. And don't let her large hat fool you, because she surprisingly can shoot giant lasers as well. You better Phoebe believe it.
Believe it! Believe it! Believe it! Believe it! I believe it all right.
As usual, we'll go through her kit and rotation, her echoes and stats, weapons, sequences, teams, showcases, and of course, my opinion on Phoebe at the end of the video. Quick note, this video was filmed on the media server and things may be subject to change upon the official release. Please check the comments below to see if anything changed. Now before continuing on to her kit, let's quickly understand what Frazzle is. Besides being Frazzle-less, it's a simple damage over time, or DOT for short, that deals a small amount of Spectro damage once every 3 seconds. Frazzle is indicated by this debuff icon on the enemy, which has a number that indicates how many Frazzle stacks are on the enemy, with each stack dealing damage a single time, and it can stack up to 10 times. As for Phoebe's kit, well, I gotta admit I was initially very confused, but fortunately it actually ends up being very simple in the end. Firstly, Phoebe's basic attacks change based on whether or not she's in her resonance skills circle thing, aka the Ring of Mirrors. If she's not in the circle but the enemy is in the circle, she'll do these cool laser attacks and enemies within the ring will take additional damage. If Phoebe herself is in the circle, she'll perform a different set of basic attacks, called Chamuel's Star, that focuses on raining lasers onto the enemies instead of shooting a laser cannon. She can also teleport herself to her circle, which is nice, and fortunately when it comes to most situations, which basics you use don't really matter too much as long as the enemy is either in the circle or Phoebe is in the circle, you'll be just fine. Now let's talk about her Forte circuit. Phoebe has 2 Forte currencies to worry about. The first is this bottom prayer bar, which automatically fills up 5 points per second, and she can hold up to 120 prayer. So this means it takes her 24 seconds to fill up this bottom prayer bar. Once her prayer bar is full, Phoebe can go into one of 2 states. Let's start with the absolution state. When you have a full prayer bar, you enter absolution state by performing a heavy attack absolution litany. This first heavy attack absolution litany deals some solid damage, applies 1 stack of Frazzle, and of course puts her into absolution state. Going into absolution state also fills up the top Forte bar resource and makes it yellow. Phoebe can now perform a stronger heavy attack called Star Flash after her basic 3 at the cost of a quarter of the top yellow Forte bar. While in absolution state, this heavy attack Star Flash deals 256% additional amplify multiplier against an enemy with Frazzle on them. So in this example, it's doing 3.56 times the damage. Not only that, but her Resonance Liberation deals a lot more damage while she's in absolution state, and her outro skill, which performs this cool spinning laser disco hat trick thing, will also deal a lot more damage. Okay, so we've covered her absolution state. Let's talk about her other state, confession state. First of all, Phoebe cannot be in both absolution and confession state at the same time, so don't bother trying. Confession state is activated by pressing and holding the skill button when she has 120 prayer. Entering confession will fill up the top Forte bar and be bluish instead of yellow, and now when you perform Phoebe's enhanced heavy attack Star Flash, she will consume half of her top Forte bar and apply 5 stacks of Frazzle. Phoebe's liberation in confession state applies 8 stacks of Frazzle, and her outro buff now changes from enhancing her outro's damage to debuffing enemy Spectro resistance by 10% and granting 100% Spectro Frazzle damage amplification. So yeah, as we can see, her 2 states play nearly the exact same, with her absolution state dealing much more damage with the option to perform 4 heavy attack Star Flashes. Meanwhile, her confession state is very efficient at applying a bunch of Frazzle stacks and can provide more supporting capabilities with her outro Spectro resistance shred and Frazzle damage buffs. Now one more quick tip is that by dodge countering, Phoebe is able to skip her usual basic attack string to perform her heavy attack star flash. So dodge countering is generally a great thing to do with her. Now as of Phoebe's release, due to the relatively negligible damage that Frazzle does, Absolution tends to be the way to go, with Spectro Rover being the main source of applying Frazzle. With that in mind, a typical rotation with Phoebe is as follows. First, stack a bunch of Frazzle onto the enemy with Spectro Rover, then use her intro, then her resonance skill plus echo, and then heavy attack Absolution Litany to enter Absolution state. Then I personally like to use her Liberation here. Now we can just spam basic attacks 1 through 3 or dodge counters to perform up to 4 heavy attack star flashes. I also personally like to swap cancel during her heavy attack star flash to Spectro Rover to help maintain Frazzle stacks and to deal some additional damage. And finally, at the end, you can perform the stylish outro to get the disco hat light party started for the rest of your team. For Phoebe's talent priority, prioritize her forte, then her liberation and skill, and finally her basics and intro skill. Up next are Phoebe's echoes, and stats. There is a clear obvious winner for Phoebe's damage, and that is the Eternal Radiant set. This thing gives 20% crit rate when Phoebe applies Frazzle, and it gives 15% additional Spectro damage when attacking an enemy with 10 stacks of Frazzle on them. Now in case you're wondering how big of an upgrade is it over the Celestial Light, it's around 15% better, so it's definitely worth farming this set. As for the main stats, it's the usual 4-3-3-1-1 setup with crit rate or crit damage in the 4 cost slot. For the 4 cost echo, use the Nightmare Morning Axe, as this thing increases Frazzle damage and gives 12% Spectro damage boost. For the 3 cost echoes, for most teams, Spectro plus Spectro is the way to go. Although, as always, using 1 attack percent is fine, but using 2 attack percents does lose a lot of damage. And of course, for the 1 cost echoes, just use attack percent. As for the substats, you'll want the usual crit rate and crit damage and attack percent, a couple of energy recharge rolls, and then heavy attack and flat attack are both fine. Speaking of energy recharge, Phoebe generally doesn't need much energy recharge, and 12% tends to be enough for most situations and most teams. Now what about rectifiers, aka her weapons? Our local hat enthusiast's best rectifier is her signature weapon, the Luminous Hymn. Now, if you have the String Master, it's actually a pretty solid weapon for Phoebe as well, at around 93% of her signature weapon. The Rhyme Draped Sprouts is another very solid stat stick for Phoebe, and the Cosmic Ripples is always another reasonable stat stick at around 81% of her signature rectifier. And surprisingly, a Refinement 5 Augment is surprisingly solid on her, giving her an actually decent 4-star rectifier option. And finally, the Ocean's Gift isn't far behind, so overall Phoebe has a solid selection of free-to-play friendly rectifiers available. Up next are Phoebe's sequences and investment priority. I'd personally prioritize her signature weapon over her sequences, since that increases her damage by more than her sequence 1. These calcs are focused on her Absolution state's improvement and not on her Confession state, so do keep that in mind. Her sequence 1 increases her liberation damage by a decent amount for both Absolution and Confession state. In particular, Confession state's liberation will do 90% more damage, which is good future proofing for potential Frazzle synergy in the future. Sequence 2 provides 120% damage amplified to her Absolution state's outro, and for her Confession state, Frazzle gains another 120% damage amplification. Sequence 2 will be great for her Confession state for another future potential Frazzle character. Next, Sequence 3 significantly improves her heavy attack for both Absolution and Confession. This is the most impactful sequence for her Absolution state, and is good to target if you want to maximize Absolution state DPS Phoebe. It also continues to power up her Confession state's damage output by improving Confession state's heavy attack multiplier by a whopping 249%, which will certainly make her incredibly good with future Frazzle. Next, Sequence 4 basically just reduces enemy Spectro resistance by 10%, which also conveniently increases your entire team's Spectro damage output. Sequence 5 increases Phoebe's Spectro damage by 12%, and Sequence 6 gives Phoebe 10% attack and triggers a free heavy attack star flash when you cast her ring. As we can see, her Absolution state improves a lot through her sequences, And with her sequences, her confession state becomes much better, future-proofing her for potential future Frazzle characters. As it stands, Phoebe is looking to be an incredible character and will likely play a crucial role in a full Frazzle-focused team in the future, but even as of her release, she's a very strong character when paired with Spectro Rover, and her sequences just further improve her potential. Now for Phoebe's teams, well, at the moment, like the rest of the harem, she's pretty much tied to the hip with Spectro Rover. Spectro Rover's Frazzle application and Frazzle duration extension is just too good for Phoebe to pass up on at the moment. However, Spectro Rover can be built with either a DPS build with a second Eternal Radiance set, which admittingly is quite costly, or even a supporting Rejuvenating Glow set. So you do have some flexibility when it comes to building Spectro Rover. Now the third slot is a bit more flexible, with my personal favorite being Sequence 2 Verena. Sequence 2 Verena just needs so little field time and is so easy to use that everything lines up really well for Phoebe's fixed 24-second prayer generation. Of course, Shorekeeper works just fine, but if you build your Spectro Rover to actually deal a decent amount of damage, Shorekeeper doesn't provide her full buffs to, well, much of Spectro Rover's rotation. Still, Shorekeeper is, as always, a great option. Other healers work as well, but we have some other options like Moonlit Cloud's Sanhua for her low field time and buffs, or even Moonlit Cloud's Mortefi for his buffs. Although keep in mind that Mortefi's heavy attack amplify doesn't benefit Phoebe as much as other characters because Phoebe provides herself a whopping 256% heavy attack amplify in absolution state. Finally, you can even run another DPS character like Chong-Li for those sweaty gamers that enjoy dual DPS quick swap playstyles. So yeah, as of Phoebe's release, her teams are a bit limited since she's pretty much tied to the hip with Spectro Rover, but if I were a gambling man, which I guess I am since I play all these gacha games, I'm willing to bet she'll have more options and perhaps even specifically related to Frazzle sometime in the future. Alright, we've got a quick showcase starting off with an S0R1 Phoebe with her signature weapon, as well as the standard S-Rover plus healer, or in this case Verena team. And we can see right off the bat that we are just doing some very basic and simple rotations. In this case, I actually over-conserved it a bit, but I wanted to make sure that the boss here had 10 stacks of Frazzle on it in order to, you know, output, I guess, Phoebe's damage here. And now we're just going to do the very standard Phoebe rotation, which is to pretty much just spam basic 3 with her enhanced heavy attack 4 times, and then we swap out onto the next character. In this case, thanks to having Verena, we can double intro Spectro Rover in order to save some field time on her, which I gotta be completely honest, I'm not 100% sure if that's worth in comparison to introing to Verena, although, you know, Verena's intro obviously just always has a lot of issues. But here we go, we are just doing a second rotation for this thing, and we are very close to actually taking this one out in 2 rotations against our Mech Abomination friend. Now, one thing to note about this run is that the Mech Abomination here in this tower doesn't actually have any buffs for Spectro damage, which is, good to kind of indicate, like, you know, how does she do against a level 90 neutral boss type enemy like this, and she does just fine. And I think with a bit more optimization and stuff, or perhaps squeezing out some damage here or there, we should be able to actually beat that in 1 less rotation. But alas, here we go. Now, the next team I have here is with Sanhua to kind of demonstrate, okay, well, you know, you can actually kind of rely on Spectro Rover's healing. It's generally enough for most tower fights, especially in order to get by pretty comfortably. So we just have a Sanhua now to kind of buff the damage of Phoebe. And we can see here that my Sanhua rotation was a bit scuffed there, but alas, you know, you're not here for perfect gameplay, you're here for some demonstrations of what she is capable of. But here we go, we are just going to do some dodge counters here and there in order to output Phoebe's, big flashy heavy attack a bit more, and then we're going to do the standard rotation as expected, and we're just going to skip ahead. And of course, you know, this team was only just a few seconds slower than the Verena team, so clearly a very capable team. Overall, Phoebe is an interesting new character that takes advantage of the new Frazzle dot mechanic introduced in Wuthering Waves. And even as of her release with such a limited roster, she's already a very solid character. What's really interesting to me is how she has 2 unique playstyles, one for dealing more damage and one that's not really utilized right now for applying a ton of Frazzle. And as of now, since she doesn't really have a great team for maximizing Frazzle damage, that's a lot of foreshadowing for a future team that may come to exploit Frazzle even more. Let me know what you think about our Frazzobulous local hatch enthusiast down in the comments below. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose, signing out.